Welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell.
It's Rose here with today's question. Can having the courage to tell our story help heal our world? In recent months, we've been talking about the evolution of consciousness as a necessity in creating solution for the climate crisis, and how the desecration and wounding of Mother is a mere reflection of the continual wounding we perpetuate, not only on the divine feminine, but the indigenous and people of color. We're seeing evidence daily of these festering wounds, long hidden in silence and darkness, being brought to the light, begging for acknowledgement and examination, all necessary steps for healing on a deep soul level. And for some years now, I have felt, well, actually, it's a knowing, that within our stories lies our greatest healing medicine. So today, I'm delighted to introduce you to the woman who helped me come to that knowing. Her name is Gail Nowak. Gail is a visibility sage and the creator of Sage Sensation Retreats. As a certified source retreat master and a founder of the award-winning consultancy, The Story Stylist, Gail believes that the entrepreneurial journey is a healing journey, one that can lead to a loving world where we dare to listen with our hearts, dance with our shadows, and rise into a new story. God, I love that. Through her intimate retreats and private VIP experiences for New Earth leaders on their soul mission, Gail leads transformative experiences that free you from your visibility wounds and raise your vibration so that your powerful presence is seen, heard, and felt with greater impact. So welcome, Gail. So excited to have you here. You, we worked together a number of years ago when you were only doing the Story Stylist. And I can just remember sitting in your kitchen and having you go deeper and deeper with your whys. What is your story and why does it propel you to do the work that you're doing? And it was so incredible. It really helped me know that what we have experienced individually is our responsibility to speak aloud, to help heal not just ourselves, but anyone else who's walking a similar path. So how did you get to be so wise?
I love that. How did you get to be so wise? Well, first of all, you put that so beautifully. And one of the, what I would say, one of the tenets, one of the foundational beliefs that I'm really wanting to live by and have been living by over the last several years is that one personal story told well and told responsibly really truly can heal many. And the key is told well and told responsibly, right? Stories are interesting things because we tell ourselves all kinds of stories about our experience, but we always have the choice about that story that we're going to tell ourselves. And if we're telling it from a place of wounding, then that's going to show up in our reality, right? That's going to be mirrored back to us in our reality. We were talking about that a little bit before we hopped on. When we work together from a business perspective. right?
Right.
But the reality is this can be on a personal level as well.
Right. And I think that, I mean, for most of our listeners, they're not in the business of being transformative leaders.
Right.
I think most people are just like, they're seeing what's happening in the world right now. And it's a sense of overwhelm for anybody who's conscious at all, not comatose, in my humble opinion. To me, it seems like it is a mirror for what, for our own individual wounds. So telling our story, as you said, responsibly, really maybe figuring out what our own story is, whether it's writing it down, speaking it aloud, and having the courage to talk about it. Because there's a lot of stuff that I know in my dysfunctional family where silence was just like, we just don't talk about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it really gets like buried under layers and layers and layers. And then all of a sudden it pops up and you're like, oh my God, there's a wound there that's never been dealt with. I see patterns and I just see, we've created so many wounds physically on our planet, but also to all the peoples that don't look like us out of our own sense of inadequacy, maybe our own need to be better than, because we don't feel that we are because of our own wounds. Is that too esoteric?
No, it totally makes sense to me. And what I'm hearing you saying is that for your listeners, right, like climate and climate change can be a mirror of that. Exactly what you're saying, like the wounds, like you can look at a satellite image of the earth and you can actually see the scars, right? Like you can see the decimated forest. You can actually physically see those wounds. And everything is a mirror. For me, my business was a mirror of that deeper subconscious, unconscious wounding that, I think that I probably shared with you as well, like the silence piece, like being silenced, that your truth doesn't matter, that the things you're feeling don't matter. Right. And it's a lie that we have been conditioned to believe, whether it's from our family of origin or it's from things that have been passed down generation to generation, or it's from, government or whatever, like
yeah, just the social paradigm we live in.
Exactly. And so, number one, it's not surprising. And it's also, it can be disheartening to see that being reflected back to us from our physical environment, right? Mm-hmm. And we also have a choice about, well, is this going to be the story that we're committing to?
That we want to continue to tell.
That we want to continue to tell. And what can we really do, number one, to elevate our own personal narrative?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So sometimes we have to do our own inner healing and our own inner work to even be able to lead and affect change externally.
Absolutely.
So we may see, we might have that deep sense and that deep knowing, like maybe many of your listeners, and I know many of your guests are like, their mission is to directly help heal this planet or be part of that process. And yet, like there's pieces that they probably have had to go through within themselves to heal themselves in order to step into that leadership and that change. And that's around their story. It might not even look like a direct connection at first of, wow, I really had to heal my childhood trauma in order for me to step up and be a leader in this climate
Remember
change.
The first time I heard that expression, your pain is your passion.
Right.
And I think that really applies to this. It's where you're hurting. You want to be what you needed and didn't get.
Right.
And that becomes what you put out into the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes there's a considerable amount of transformation and healing that needs to happen in order to be that leader, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times that has to do with the personal story that we're telling ourselves internally and the personal story that we're sharing with the world, and how, not just with our words, but how we're showing up, what our energy is
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how would you tell our readers to create access to their story? Like, do people really know what their story is and they're not listening, or do people really just not have a clue? And if they don't have a clue, how do they tap into it?
In my experience with working with clients, they almost always know. They almost always have a sense of what it is. And this was true for me too. Like, I knew, and I could not logically wrap my head around it, but I knew that there was a particular story, sharing about my childhood wounding and my childhood trauma. I had this deeper sense that that was the thing that was getting in the way of where I wanted to go with my mission in my business, because I wasn't telling it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this sense, and usually this is what I see, is that people will have a beautiful story that they can share, but because it's painful, right? Because it's about how they had to show up and survive because of what happened to them. There's all kinds of judgments around it and questions and doubts around it. Right.
Same.
So if resistance, if you're noticing resistance, that's probably the place to start, right? Like, I've got this thing that's nagging me. I really don't feel like doing it. I've got some resistance around this. So the first step really is to just get curious about that. Like, what is that really for me? Because typically what I've seen is that that's the thing that's actually coming up to be healed and transformed. Whether or not you end up several steps down the line sharing that publicly, that's the thing that is coming up for you in this moment as an opportunity to heal and transform. So it's not about avoiding, and trust me, I'm speaking from experience because I did this for decades. So like, that happened in the past. I don't want to look at it. I don't need to deal with it again, and it'll just keep coming back until.
It's amazing because, I mean, I see, different personal transformation work never ends, different layers, you get deeper and deeper. And it's like, if you've put something, I kind of describe it as I'm visually oriented. I put it in a box and I put it on the shelf. And then, a bunch of other boxes get put in front of it. And but someday that box is calling you to take it down, and you open it up and it still holds the same jolt, the same vibration, intensity wise, that it did when you stopped looking at it. So the only way to really disseminate that energy, the only way to release that energy is actually to address it, to address the shame, the guilt, the uneasiness, the uncomfortableness, the dysfunction, all those lovely words.
Yeah. And I would even go a step further to say, address it and love it.
Ooh, love it.
Really love it up. Right.
Okay.
Because those boxes are all pieces of you. And so when we take it and we put that in a box and we put that in the closet and we close the door, it's a form of self-abandonment.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And really the path to healing is love, and it starts on the inside. And it really starts with radically loving ourselves. And I'm all for self-care, don't get me wrong, but I'm talking about really deeply loving ourselves. This is beyond the spa days and all of that. It's going in and really going into those dark places and finding a way to love all the places where we have abandoned or rejected ourselves.
So telling our story, is it necessary to tell it? We don't have to tell it from a stage. Can you just tell it to yourself on paper to help heal?
That's definitely the first place to start, right? that's absolutely the first place to start is, number one, I would say starting from that wounded place, just to get your bearings of, this is how I'm feeling. Like, this is what my experience was. Right. And I love that you said on paper, because we can think about it all day long, but when we see it in black and white, I call it an alchemical process, where when you see it in black and white and you can kind of step outside of yourself, if you've done a little bit of transformation work anyway, if you've done a little bit of inner work, you will then start to see the places where you're like, something's off here. And you'll start to be able to shift into that curious place, out of that wounded place of, wait a minute, is this even true?
I was just going to say that. I was just going to say true.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when I'm writing things about how I feel, and how I'm being affected by something, there's a story there that I'm telling myself, and I'm like, is that story true? Is this the reality? This is my perception of it. But if you can get to a higher vision and look down and say, what else was going on there? This was my wounded child looking at this event.
Right.
And yeah, is it true?
Right. Is it true? And is it even true now? Right. And I feel like, I hope I say his name right, but Gabor Mate's work and Byron Katie's work, like, I feel like they have wonderful tools to help you see how the facts of the situation, but then see how you thought and felt about it then creates your reality. And so if you're wanting to shift the reality, the places to look within that story that you've written down about the thing that actually occurred, right? This isn't about denying our experiences, but it's looking in those places of, when this thing happened, I thought this, which made me feel this. Is that thought even true? And so, yeah, getting that personal story down on paper, even if it's just for yourself, even if you have no intention of sharing that with anybody else or sharing it on the stage. And by the way, you don't have to share it that way, right? Like, we can share our stories in conversation.
And there's something also about, like you were saying, the stories in your head. If you keep ruminating about it, it seems like it gets bigger and bigger. Once you put it out, and that's what I like about writing, is I'm an oversharer anyway. So I have lots of friends that I share my stuff with, but they probably run away when they see me coming sometimes. But when I get it out of my body, there is a release. And then that begins the healing. That's where the healing begins.
Right. That's absolutely right. If you're constantly ruminating, you're holding that energy. You're holding the energy of the past, and there's no flow. There's nothing. I don't want to say nothing. I don't want to be too absolutist about this, but when you're holding that energy of the past, there isn't space for that new story to come through. So I love what you're saying. Like, it moves. It literally moves the energy through you. It helps you release it. This is probably why a lot of people write, they write books and, or just journal. Journaling is it's something that can be hugely beneficial when you're doing, obviously, story work, but just in your healing in general. I think that some people make the mistake of thinking that when they go to a healer, and they're going with the intention of, oh, this person's going to heal me, or I'm going to meditate. And you don't do the process after those experiences to really feel into and write down what came up for you. What feels true for you now? What do you want? What feels like it's ready to be released and let go of? And what changes do you need to make going forward? Like, that's a critical part of the healing process.
So how can we extrapolate that to creating positive change for our world?
So if we create our reality, right?
Which I believe we do.
Right. Yeah, we do. We absolutely do. I believe that too. So we have to do our own inner work. It starts on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've noticed in my own healing journey, Rose, is that, well, number one, like this, I get that this is a climate change podcast and we're kind of exploring a lot of different areas in this discussion, but I just want to speak to that.
We definitely, we started this podcast believing that, climate change is happening for us and not just to us, because there is this work that needs to happen, that source is telling us, look what you've created based on your wounding, Right. So it is meant to be, it is, I do have people that talk about investments and all this, and all the things that we can do for plastics and recycling and fossil fuels, yada, yada, yada. But it feels like that's kind of the ground level. Above that is where we're talking, or below that, soul level and, source level. There's something bigger that's going on here. And I think that's really what we're trying to address.
Yeah. And what I'll say about that is, while number one, I really try to live my life in that way, like even before going deep dive into my own healing journey, kind of doing the things, right? Like doing the responsible things for the environment and doing it because I believe in it. But what I've noticed in my own healing journey is that there's just a deeper reverence, right? Like there's just a deeper reverence for connecting with nature, connecting with other humans, really being able to receive more love and to see the divine in everything. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that I would have been able to get to that place had I not really committed to looking at and addressing and loving up and releasing that wounding. And what I've noticed on a more tangible outcome is that there are just certain things that don't even resonate with me. Like there's certain food I just can't eat anymore. Right.
Are you talking meat? Or
so I still eat meat, but I've noticed that I eat less of it, and so these things are like happening in a natural way. I don't drink as much as I used to drink. I don't eat as much meat. I'm having a real hard time with eating processed foods. It's when you're raising your vibration. Yeah. Those things that lower it been used to start to fall away naturally.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I find that too. I think they do hold a lower vibration so that when you're actually absorbing them into your system, it's bringing your vibration down. And when you let go of them, it's almost a craving, right?
Yeah.
The lower vibration is calling you to feed this vibration, feed it. And then you're like, no. And once you let go of it, it's like when I stopped eating gluten. It was hard at first.
Yeah.
But now it's like, I can't remember the last time I had gluten because, my body doesn't crave it anymore because it feels better to be clean. I sense that a higher vibration is just it feels cleaner.
Yes, it absolutely does. And then that has the ripple effect, right? So if we're eating less meat, if we're eating less processed foods, if we're eating less sugar, because we're doing the inner work and we're raising our vibration, that has a ripple effect out onto the planet.
Yeah, a rising tide lifts all boats. So I can feel that. I'm just trying to see where we want to go next, but that feels like.
Well, you did speak to that there's something more happening. And I think that that's so spot on. It's a global shakeup and it's a global wake up. Right? And we're seeing that with the environment, but we're seeing that with our educational systems, our political systems, like across the board.
Economic justice. Yeah, it's everything. The entire paradigm is crumbling. And as I think, as more of us realize that, and as we speak it, as we talk about it, we're bringing it into reality.
Right.
We're acknowledging the wound, we're healing it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so if we acknowledge the wounds and heal the wounds within ourselves, imagine a world of people who are whole and healed and capable, really going to bat for humanity.
Mm-hmm. And not just humanity, because
well,
when all the sentient beings on the world that are going the way of the dinosaur.
And you're right. Like, I say humanity, but in my mind I'm thinking this whole planet.
Mm-hmm. I find myself spending much more time in nature, being drawn to. I'm craving it. Yeah, I'm craving it. I find it healing. I've mentioned this many, many times, and some of my listeners are going to be like, she's going to talk about that again. I like to stand out in my yard with my bare feet because I feel the energy of the earth, and I need that grounding. But now I'm finding like crazy making things like the wind in the trees and how it speaks to me, and the hawk that flies overhead, or the seagulls that fly on the thermals, that float on the thermals. And I think they all have messages for us. They're all talking to us. They're telling their stories. Are we listening? And listening to their stories helps us heal, and helps us tell our stories, gives us courage to tell our stories.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So tell me, you're a sage. What is the Sage Retreat?
Sage Sensation Retreat. Yes, I lead small group, intimate retreats and private VIP experiences. There's a lot of healing and transformation that happens. I work with new Earth leaders who are really stepping into their next level of leadership and getting more visible. And so when we get more visible, our stuff comes up oftentimes, right?
Yeah.
And so those visibility fears, those visibility blocks, what I've seen through my work with clients is that they're often connected to those childhood wounds of not feeling seen, of not feeling heard. And so in order to really show up in our soul mission, we have to go there. We have to go to those wounded places and heal them before really having that impact with the external world. So those retreats are really about helping my clients, number one, just identify and then heal that wounding, whatever is up for transformation at that time, so that they can really show up and speak their truth and shine in their mission.
This was an evolution out of telling story. So is this your evolution out of, this is kind of your evolution?
Yeah, it is part of my evolution. And what I was noticing, Rose, is that I have a background in marketing and PR and messaging and all of the practical things, right? And so that's my zone of excellence, if you are familiar with that term. And what I was noticing is that I was positioning my business from that aspect and working with clients in that way. And they were coming to me for that. But behind the scenes, there was this whole other level of healing going on just organically. Mm-hmm. But because I had to do my own healing, number one, around some things, right? And number two, because I hadn't really connected the dots yet, what would happen is I'd work with clients on those practical things, but because we didn't do the transformational work ahead of time, they'd have all these beautiful pieces of marketing. They'd have their story, or they'd have, their book, or they'd have a talk, and then they wouldn't go out and share it. Mm-hmm. And that was the visibility wounding and fear that was coming into play. And so part of my evolution was, number one, like connecting those dots. And number two, realizing that, wait a minute, this healing piece has sort of already been happening. What would it be like to be more intentional and put that transformation first?
Yeah, makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it takes, you spoke to having a clean and clear energy to hold that space for people.
Yeah.
And to have that compassion and to be non-judgmental. And because we've all been through it, right? We've all been through our thing, and we've all been through our thing, and we've all done the best we can during that thing. And then in hindsight, it can be really easy to be so hard on ourselves and to judge and to say, hey, I should have known better. I should have done it this way. And it's like to work with somebody who can, number one, hold the space for where you are in the moment and also what you experienced. And number two, to help you pull out of that self-judgment and have more self-love and compassion. Sometimes we can do that on our own. And sometimes it takes another person to help us do that, whether it's me or anybody else, right?
I don't think we heal in isolation. I think we're meant to be in connection with other people.
Right. Yeah.
So my prior thought was, there are so many of us, or in my experience, there are so many of us that have been silenced, that have been told that we don't air dirty laundry, we don't speak about this, or we've been shamed into, we've been coerced, or we've been shamed, or whatever. That's something that's kept us silent. And if we have had experience of speaking our truth and then been shunned or ostracized or ignored, abandoned, whatever, because of it, it creates its own trauma, and it reinforces the fact that we can't talk about what's really true. And you see that with all the Me Too movement and the economic injustice and racial violence, and it goes on and on and on. It's everywhere. It's there with the climate crisis. It's like, we don't talk about the fact that we're killing off 50% of our species. We don't talk about the fact that this week there was devastating news out of Plymouth, that they're going to release radioactive water into Cape Cod Bay. And the media doesn't really cover it as well as I'm going to say this, and I know you're a media person, as well as they should. I mean, we need to know this stuff in order to be able to step into the space where we can use our voices against it. But silence is complicity, and we've been taught to be silent.
Yeah.
And right now, Mother Earth is, in my humble opinion, is crying for us not to be silent anymore. So maybe we practice with our own stories so that we get courageous enough to be able to tell the bigger story and the bigger story and the bigger story. And then if there's enough of us that have the same story, we make these little tribes and we band together, and those tribes band together. And that's how we come to the collective. I don't know.
I think you said that beautifully. Silence is complicity. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So whether you condone the situation, it's saying that you condone the situation. If you look the other way and don't say something.
Yeah. And how many times have we seen that in our history and how that's worked out?
Yeah. Well, it's all coming up right now, baby.
It sure is. And it's coming up. I believe it's coming up because this is the time to speak up and to heal it.
Yeah.
This is the time to create a new experience.
Yeah. And like you said, or as we were discussing, when you release that, you create space for something else to come into that. Energy of course, a vacuum. No.
Yes.
Yeah. So if there's a
vacuum.
Yeah. So if there's a void there, then there's something that's going to come in and fill it. But you've got to get rid of the old detritus.
Right.
And the scar tissue, essentially, to allow new growth to happen. It definitely feels like there's a lot of metaphors here, but it definitely feels like we are we're birthing something new. There's a lot of, we're in the birth canal, I would say, of something new.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I know you say that a little bit in tongue in cheek, but it does feel like that. It's dark and it's uncertain and it's maybe a bit painful. And
Yeah.
it's like, it doesn't have to be that way forever.
Right. How long is this labor going to last? Yeah. Exactly. You don't know when you get into it though. Right.
But when you continue, and that's the thing, that's the beautiful thing about our experience and about energy too, right? Like it contracts and it expands, it contracts and expands. It's not just always expansion.
Right.
It's not always contraction. The two have to work together.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I can see that kind of a pulsating, a kind of an embryonic kind of flowing back and forth and back and forth. That helps push us through.
Right.
Yeah, to the other side. Interesting times, my dear. Interesting
Absolutely.
times. Well, we should wrap up, but we always wrap with the 3-step process. Do you have any good news on the climate front to share?
Well, I do think that the good news is that we are having this global wake up call. I think that yes, we're seeing the devastation and the negative impacts on our environment, and at the same time, we're also seeing more and more people coming forth and really speaking up and speaking their truth and not being silenced.
Yeah.
So I think that is hugely positive news. And I think that, some of the things that it's so fascinating with the pandemic, right? Like some of the interesting things that we started noticing with that, which was it's been scary for a lot of people and uncertain and has kind of rocked the world. And at the same time, look at how it kind of helped heal some of the environmental issues, right? So yes, it's the times are definitely changing, and in change there's chaos, and also there's some beautiful healing to be had as well when we're willing to commit to that. And I feel like we are seeing that. So I see that as good news. It's, yes, it's scary, and there's good things that are coming out of it for those people who are choosing and who are really committed to creating this new earth.
Yeah, lovely. So next would be an action step, something our listeners can do to move themselves forward.
Yeah, I would say heal your inner environment. Start there. Heal the story that's no longer serving you, because we can create anything we want.
And then a sanity tip. So you're in this work. It's got to be kind of crazy making, and you're opening space and supporting people who are doing their deep, dark work. How do you stay sane when it feels like,
Move. I move, dance, walk, get out in nature, play, sit on the ground. I love that you talked about that. In 2019, I really had this calling to just walk, and I had no idea what that was all about. I've been on in addition to my healing journey, I've been on a fitness journey for many decades, and that really looked intense. And so, Spirit came in and was like, you just got to go out and move, and you don't have to do it with any particular purpose right now. I learned later what the purpose was, but at the time I was just like, really walk? Like, why am I not running? Why am I not doing, high intensity cardio? Or, I questioned it. But some of the things that you were speaking to, what I realized was that, number one, walking was helping me move my stuck energy. Number two, it was really helping me connect to source and to receive messages from the animals, from the trees, from the earth. So when you're feeling stuck, or when you're feeling desperate, or when you're feeling sad or angry or even joyful, like get out and move.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Dance, play.
Yeah, there's something about just being out there, and even in this cold New England air. I know gals here in New England as well. I'll walk like half a block and I'll be like, ah, the fresh air is just like, it is filling my lungs and just creating so much expansiveness. Just my lung capacity feels better. And, as opposed to being in the house where it's recycled air and yada, yada. Yeah, movement and dancing. My niece got married this weekend. I was admonishing my partner. I'm like, if you're coming to this wedding with me, we're going to dance the entire time because I need to let off some steam. And he lovingly was willing. And so, yeah, it was just like a huge dance party. And I came home and I was just my body was just limp and relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's self-care. It maybe feels a little wild, like it doesn't look like the spa day, like you said, or having your nails done or whatever, but it's like, yeah, move your body.
Yeah. I don't know if this is everybody's experience, but I know for me, like it's probably the quickest path to accessing joy and playfulness and wonder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lovely. I think that's true. Well, thank you so much for your time. Stories are our greatest medicine, and you taught me that.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be here and to be a part of your journey too.
That's this week's Friday episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.